I don't know what it was exactly, but I just wanted to tell you all, as I'm standing over there and I'm waiting and Courtney's praying and we've just had this time of worship through music together, I just want to tell you all just how humbled I am that you allow me to be your pastor. I don't know, it was something that as she said, as Pastor Justin comes up here, that it hit me. And sometimes it does, but it hit me a little bit different this morning, that it truly is, it's a privilege, it is an honor, it is something that many times I sit here and I go, why in the world would you all want to even bother to listen to what I have to say? That you would trust me to lead in any way. And I don't say that to be like, hey, afterwards make sure you build me up. I say that to say I'm truly humbled that you would accept me, you would allow me to be in this position, to step into what I believe God has called me to do and what God has called us to do together. But with that said, I don't know, I felt like I just needed to say that this morning. But I'm going to invite you all to stand. I mentioned last week that we're going to start at the beginning of this, during this series, at the beginning of each message, we're going to take a moment, we're going to kind of say our verse together. And there's something about that physical act of standing that kind of brings it in a little bit more, I think, anyway. But it's from Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 6, and I believe we have it for the screens for you. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And before you sit down, I want you to just take a moment, because I know that throughout the course of our weeks, things can feel anything but peaceful. And so we've had times in here where we've actually taken moments at the beginning of a message or the beginning of the series, and or at the beginning of the service, and we've just taken time to breathe and be still. And I'm just going to invite you for a moment, if you want to close your eyes, if you don't want to, that's perfectly fine, but just take a moment and be still in this moment that God has given us. Psalm chapter 5, and this will be on the screen too if you want to read along, or if you want to keep your eyes closed and just have this be your prayer this morning. We read the psalmist writing, "O Lord, hear me as I pray." And this is my prayer over us this morning for these next several minutes. Pay attention to our groaning. Listen to our cry for help, my King and my God, for I pray to no one but to you. Listen to our voices in the morning. Each morning, Lord, I bring my request to you and wait expectantly. God, this morning we come to you and we wait expectantly for what it is that you would say to us. We pray this in your name. Amen. You can grab a seat if you would like. So last week we jumped into this new, it's kind of our Christmas series, and I realize we addressed it, that this is kind of an early start to a Christmas series, but we jumped into a discussion, a conversation, several conversations about how we live in a world that is missing peace, that many people are walking around, the world as a whole is walking around absolutely missing peace. That we know as we come in here and we hear and we talk about that we know where true peace is found, but yet we still go into our regular lives, we go into our work week, we go into raising kids, we go into whatever it is that we're doing, and many times throughout the course of that week, we just feel that there's something missing. We don't feel the peace that we know that we should have, but we also discussed how we have a Prince of Peace who came to give us his peace. That's why we're going to look at that verse every single week throughout the course of the next month or so, is we're going to look at that at Christmas, the thing that we're celebrating, the person that we're celebrating, the big gift that we're celebrating is that the Prince of Peace came from where he lived, where he lives, to walk among us and give us his peace. Sometimes we use the word hope, sometimes we use the word joy, but he comes to give us his peace. Whether we feel it or not, he comes to give us his peace. And so over the course of the next several weeks, we're taking some time to just kind of try and look at how can we find, how can we receive, how can we accept that gift of peace that he's come to give us. And we jumped in last week and we began to really discuss some of the mental health crises that are plaguing our world right now, that I believe are absolutely an attack from the enemy to try and keep us from the gift that has been given us, the distractions that he'll throw in our lives over, several different methods that he'll use to get us there. But anything that he can do to distract us from this gift that has been given to us, or to just flat out reject the gift that has been given to us. That is not to say, and we talked about this last week, that I believe that our answer to all of the attacks to our mental and our spiritual health, our emotional health that the enemy throws at us is we just need to pray more. You just need to have more faith. That's the answer that the church has given for a very long time. We talked a little bit about the myth that Christians don't struggle with mental health issues. A true Christ follower wouldn't struggle because a true Christ follower is following the Prince of Peace. The true Christ follower has accepted the one who comes to bring us peace. And so how could you, as a Christ follower, be experiencing anything but absolute peace? But we know when we really get honest that that's just not true. That sometimes there are those who are following Christ who are absolutely in a crisis because there is still an enemy that is attacking them and trying to remove that from their lives. And we looked at a biblical story last week, and we're going to look at several others over the course of the next several weeks, that we see these stories of real humans, and I try really hard not to call them characters of the Bible, because as soon as we call them characters, it makes it feel like we're reading a play. It makes it feel like we're reading a work of fiction. These are people from Scripture who are struggling with very real things that we still struggle with today. I want to tell you a couple of stories this week that these are these particular individual stories, but it's possible that these are also your stories. That you're going to hear these and you're going to be like, I relate to that. I heard from several of you last week that, man, I felt like you were talking directly to me. Like I related so much with what it was that you were saying, and you might find yourself in some of these stories today. The first story is about a man who had an incredibly important leadership job. He had one of those jobs that there are thousands of people that are underneath him that are relying on him for leadership. They're relying on his decisions. They're relying on his direction. They're relying on him making the right choices, because the choice that he makes is going to directly impact their livelihood. It's going to directly impact how their life goes, how much peace and joy they experience, how much stability they experience. His choices impact multitudes. And he's one of those guys that it just feels like more and more and more gets put on his plate. But they're all such important things that nobody in their right mind, we would say, no, I'm not going to take that. Because it's too big of a deal. And somebody's got to get it done. And this man is absolutely given the gifts to get these jobs done. We would look at this man and we would say, man, that is an incredibly successful leader. That is one of those high capacity leaders that, man, he can handle so much. I wish that I could handle half of what this man handles. I wish that I had half of his ability. I wish that I had half of his skills at leading other people. If only I could be like him. These thousands of people that he's over, and really the nation that looks at him, they look at him as an absolute success. But this man is unraveling. He's not showing anybody that he's unraveling, but he's beginning to break down. He's beginning to get to that point where there are too many responsibilities on his plate. He doesn't necessarily recognize this yet because, by golly, these things are too important, and he doesn't have time to admit that there is too much for him to do, that he is overwhelmed. We read his story, or at least we read part of his story in Exodus chapter 18, when we see that his father-in-law, this man, comes to this man named Moses, this man who is such a big deal that the Israelite people for years and years after, and even now some would say that they follow the law of Moses because he led them on a freedom march. He led them to into the well, he didn't go into the promised land, but he led them to the promised land, away from slavery. He was the one that God spoke to, and God gave the commandments that they're supposed to follow, and God gave the instructions for all of these different things that they're supposed to do and build and festivals and all these different types of things. Like, he's a big deal. And this man has his father-in-law come up to him, and his father-in-law sees him, and he sees all he's doing for the people, and he says, what is this you are doing for the people? Why do you alone sit as judge? While all these people stand around you from morning till evening. And Moses answered him, because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, they bring it to me. And I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws. This is a big job. This is a big deal. This is not something that you hear God say, do this, and you say, no thanks, too much. At least that's the mentality that he had, and that's the mentality that many of us would also have. But Moses' father-in-law, which, by the way, his father-in-law's name is Jethro, and I just feel like that's important to point out for some reason. I don't know why. But Moses' father-in-law replies, what you are doing is not good. What? Like, I led the people out of slavery. I led the people to this point. I'm the one who God said, hey, smack that rock and water's going to come out of it. I'm the one who God said, hey, put your rod in the ground and the waters are going to part so you can walk across it. And then God said, okay, now pick it up and I'm going to have all the waters flood over the Egyptian people following us. Like, I've done all these things. I think I can handle this. Like, you can kind of see this going through Moses' mind. I'm strong enough. I'm not weak. What you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. The moral of this story that I want you to take away is always, if you're not married yet, or if you are, I guess it's too late for you, choose your in-laws wisely. Jim, if you are watching this at some point throughout this week, thank you for being a very wise father-in-law. No, obviously that's not where we're going with this story. But I did want to throw that part out just in case my father-in-law watches this one. Let me tell you about another man. We'll come back to Moses in a little bit. I want to tell you about another guy. This guy was one of those guys that had pulled off some of the most crazy feats that you've ever seen done. You know, think about the stellar athlete that you might look at, or the stellar musician that you might listen to, or the artist that people look at their stuff and they're like, oh my goodness, that is absolutely amazing. The Sistine Chapel, and it's Michelangelo, right? Bill, where are you? Michelangelo did it? Yep, okay. I want to make sure I got that one right. Like, we look at the things that these people do and we're like, this is absolutely incredible. I wish that I could do that kind of stuff. Like, this man is one of those people who has done absolutely amazing things. And people look at him, and sure, some people don't really like him because that's always going to happen. I mean, I've told you before, I'm not a LeBron James fan. He's an incredible athlete. I can't take that away from him, but I'm not really a fan of his. Some people are. You think of Michael Jordan. Some people love him, some people don't. I think Larry Bird was mentioned over here, so I got to make sure that I throw him in there. But we think about these people that they just do these absolutely incredible things. And we look up to them, and it's the same type of thing where we look at them and we're like, I wish that I could do that kind of stuff. And yet this man who has done all these incredible things that people look up to and they wish that they could do that kind of stuff, and people for years look at and wish that they could do that kind of stuff, this is where we pick up his story in 1 Kings chapter 19. It says Elijah, and I want to point out that Elijah was actually somebody that at points in Jesus' life, Jesus, the Son of God, the Son of Man, the one who came to redeem us of our sins, the one who came to die for us, the one who pulled off all these miracles and brought people back to life, there were moments where they thought Jesus was Elijah reincarnated. That's how big of a deal Elijah was. As Elijah would pull off miracles that other people couldn't do, as Elijah faces down 850 prophets of a false god, and faces them down all by himself and wins the battle, 1 versus 850. Obviously, we know he didn't win the battle, God won the battle. But Elijah was the one who was used. That man goes through that moment, huge victory in his life. And then we pick him up in 1 Kings 19. It says, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed. Remember what he had just done, that he had just had the biggest victory of his life. This is a man who had done miracles, prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. And this isn't the take my life and let it be. No, this is the take my life. I'm ready to die. I am no better than my ancestors. God, I am worn out. I am broken. I am defeated. I am burned out. I've got nothing left. In 2021, there was a survey that was done that showed that over half of American workers are burned out as a result of their job demands. Not just tired, not just, I don't like my job, not just I wish that I had a different job, but are burned out as a result of their job demands. And then you add on to that many of them have children at home or they have elderly parents that they're taking care of. You add on to it the pressures of life that come in with paying bills from the job that they're burned out from to make the money from that spot. You come with all of the different responsibilities that come if they're involved in school. You look at all of the different accessibilities that we have, the conveniences that we have that actually serve to wear us out instead. And you combine that with the job and all these different things piling in, and we see a world around us full of people. We see people in this room, whether you know it or not, that are just burned out. And when I say burnout, I'm not talking about like they're just, we're tired and things have gotten a little rough, things are a little bit busy. I'm talking overwhelmed, defeated, broken down. I'm talking, not just stress, not just I have a big event coming up, not just there's something big in my life and once I get past it, I'll be okay, but chronic stress that you feel as if we're just going to absolutely crumble underneath it. I cannot handle all of the things going on in life. I cannot handle one more thing. If I get one more thing that somebody comes up and says, I need you to do this, I'm going to be done. I cannot, and the feeling won't go away. And I get it because I've said it, that I understand that for some of us, we sit here and we hear this and we hear, okay, they're burned out of their jobs. Well, let me tell you, life used to be a whole lot harder. Life used to be so much busier. Hey, I was that high school student who had 3 jobs at one time. I was working at Super 8, I was working at Pizza Hut, and I was getting up early in the morning and I was making the donuts. I went through an entire spring break where I spent almost 0 time playing with my friends, relaxing, going to movies, any of that kind of stuff, because I went from one job to the next job. And then after I got off work at that job, I just slept at that job so that I could wake up and go back to work at that job. That's the advantages of sleeping at a hotel or working at a hotel. You take one of the free rooms, you sleep, you get up, you go back to work. I did that in high school, and so I have these moments where I'm like, really? Like, are things really that hard? I mean, in the process, I was in cross country, I was in tennis, I was incredibly active in everything that the youth group or the church had to do. There was not an option for me growing up of, hey, just sleep through this youth event or just sleep through whatever this is that's going on. Like, no, you're going to be there. You're going to tell your work that you can't work on the days that youth events are going on. Did all of that. So I hear the people who might say, People are just getting weaker. People can't handle things like they used to because we're just so pampered these days. But there is something else going on beyond people just getting weaker. I'm not even going to go out and say that there are elements to that being true, because I think that there is an attack going on that while we may look and say people just need to get tougher, no, I think that there is an attack that is trying to keep people from being able to recover. When I talk about burnout, again, I'm not talking about stress. I'm talking about burnout as in when it affects you on a physical level. Burnout as a mental health crisis is when you become easily fatigued, and some of you are going to be like, hey, this is called getting older, and I realize that's part of it. Some of these things, our bodies break down because we just age, and that's part of this. But when you begin to see multiples of these showing up as one at one time, at the same time that you're getting a bunch of other stuff dumped on your plate, it might be time to start thinking that maybe this is more than aging, or maybe this is more than I just need caffeine or a nap. But it affects us in a physical sense that we become easily fatigued. We are low in energy. We have difficulty sleeping. Headaches come on higher. I hear more and more people, myself included, talking about getting headaches and migraines than I remember ever hearing in my life. We have muscle pains. Again, I know I'm getting older. I'm going to get more muscle pains. I understand that part. To cope with these things, we begin to start going to prescription pain meds or alcohol or caffeine. Anybody not able to start their day without caffeine? Some of you just aren't raising your hands, because I know there's more than 3 people in this room. If Sarah was in here, her hand would have to go up. Did you know that that's actually one of the signs and the symptoms of somebody who's about to experience a mental health diagnosis of burnout? When you can't start your day without medicating, which is caffeine. I told you last week that one of the reasons we were going to talk about burnout this week is because this is the one that I am most at risk of suffering from. As far as the things that we're going to talk about, this is the one that I have seen the most in my life begin to rear its head. And I would say, undiagnosed, that there have been moments in my life where this has been my life. See, it affects us in physical ways, in mental ways, in emotional ways. You know, I mentioned the physical, but it affects our fight and our flight, to where we get to this point of we're just feeling absolute fear and desperation over anything coming up. That's that whole amygdala part. It affects our frontal cortex, where all of a sudden we become indecisive and we can't remember things anymore. Again, a symptom of age, I know, but when it's all of a sudden and there's no reason for it, and all of a sudden these are problems and we have all these stressors going on in our life, it affects us emotionally, where we begin to we lose motivation to do anything, or we get to the point where we really just don't care anymore. And these are the things that, as I've looked at different points in my life, I've seen that's been me. I didn't want to admit it because I thought it was weak to admit that I had more on my plate than I could handle. Because I wanted to be the Superman. I wanted to be the super youth pastor. I wanted to be the super pastor that could handle all of these different things. When I was at Highland, there was a point, Highland and Casper, where I came from, there was a point where I was leading the youth group. I was leading worship for CR. I was getting ready to lead on a weekend. I was speaking at different times. And there was actually one of the ladies on staff. She looked at me as I'm running through the halls in our offices, which Highlands building was significantly larger, so it was like a quarter of a mile to get from the sanctuary to the offices inside the building. So, I mean, I was at a run because I was trying to do all of these different things and balance all these different things because, man, I can do it. I can do all of this stuff. I am strong enough for this. God built me to be able to do all this. And then what I began to find is that I would start to lose my voice on a consistent basis. And I'd just be sitting there like, well, it's because I don't do this enough. If I did this more often, then I would be able to get through the weekend and I would still have my voice and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I would go on youth trips as a young youth pastor, and I would, like Dara's doing right now as a youth pastor, and I would come back and I would take 2 days off. which is what I advise every youth pastor to do. When you go on these trips, adults sitting in this room, Dara is not on vacation this weekend. When she goes to IYC, she is not on vacation. She might be in a fun place and doing fun stuff, but she is anything but on vacation. It is 24/7. Even your sleep is not enjoyable. Or I should say not relaxing. That'd be a better word than enjoyable. But I would come back from these, and I would take a couple of days off to recover as a young person when our bodies recover faster. And then I got older, and I got to where, I can handle more responsibilities, so now I start coming back, and it's one day off. And then I start coming back, and it's a half of a day off, and then it's coming back. I'm like, no, I can be back in the office tomorrow. And my body began to break down. I would begin to lose my voice on a consistent basis. And the scariest part about it for me looking back, the most worrisome part about it for me looking back is that I wasn't really concerned about losing my voice just because I didn't have a voice. I was concerned about losing my voice because I wouldn't be able to do my job if I didn't have my voice. Because it turns out I do a lot of talking. And I know some of you are like, oh, we know, we hear you every Sunday. You do a lot of talking. But if I lose my voice, it's going to be really hard to preach, to get up in front of people and to speak, to get up in front of people and lead worship. And so I began to become concerned with this whole losing my voice on a consistent basis thing, that I wasn't going to be able to do my job, which then made me push harder, because really what I need to do is I just need to get stronger so that my voice can hold out longer. And then I began to cope with ridiculous amounts of caffeine, to the point that I realized that I didn't drink anything during a day that didn't have caffeine in it. Like it was lattes in the morning, not black coffee, that's disgusting. It was lattes in the morning, and then it was energy drinks later in the morning, followed by iced tea at lunch, followed by either another energy drink or a latte in the afternoon, mixed in with a bunch of pop in the process of all of it, and not caffeine-free diet junk that's just, ugh, like the real stuff. And that was my day that, I've never been one who likes drinking water. I think water is absolutely boring, and I don't know why God decided that's the thing that we need to fill our bodies with. But it was at ridiculous levels because I needed to be able to push myself farther. And in the process of that, since living in Fort Collins, fitness has been at least something that I have cared about to some extent. But in the process of all of that, I would do one of two things. I would either just completely forget about it and say I don't have time for it, or I would go completely overboard with it and make myself get up in the morning and do a workout, then consume all the caffeine and not be able to go to bed without doing another workout, because I had to make sure that I got in enough of that so that I could make my body stronger while I was making my mind stronger, and I was pushing myself way farther than God ever intended for me to push myself. What I began to find as I got honest about my life, as I was getting ready to move here, and then shortly after moving here, was that at about the 2.5 to 3 year mark of everywhere that we lived, I was ready to get out. I was ready to be done with wherever it was that we were. Which I'm going to point out, I'm at the 2.5 year mark right now. But I would, because when you get to the 2.5 to 3 year mark in ministry, and probably with a lot of other jobs too, I haven't worked those as an adult, so I can't tell you for sure from my experience. But at the 2.5 to 3 year mark, people begin to expect more of you. We call it the honeymoon phase, that at the beginning, everyone's like, man, everything you do is awesome. This is incredible. And that starts to wear off. And then at about the 2.5 year mark, they're like, hey, it's time for you to be really, really good at what you do. Your learning phase is over. You can handle this now. And especially as I got to Highland, and I was at the 2.5-year mark was about the 9-year mark of me being a youth pastor, I expected of myself to know what I was doing, to be the expert in the room. I was getting on some national teams with youth ministry, which just increased the expectation on myself that I need to know what I'm doing. And my body began to shut down because of it. I became more spiritually disinterested than I had ever been in my life, which is a little ironic because I had more church responsibilities than I had ever had in my life. Doing things like going to community groups, I wanted less and less than I had ever wanted in my life because it was one more thing on my plate. It was one more spot where I had to be somewhat of a pastor. I mean, I came up with all sorts of different reasons. Ours was on a Sunday afternoon, and I was burned on Sunday afternoons. I was done. So I began to try to socially withdraw in that one. Now, I have a wife who said, no, you might not think you need community group, but I need community group, and so we're going to community group. And every time I would leave, and I was thankful for it. But I would try and pull back from it. And I saw my health in so many different ways begin to fail. And some of you are in here today, and you're in that spot. When we look at the stories of Elijah and Moses, we look at Elijah, like I said, we see a man who performed all kinds of miracles, a man who confronted an evil king and took on all of these false prophets and won the day, a man who was looked up to and would be looked up to for years and years, get to a point where he was done. He was broken. He couldn't handle anymore, and he called out to God, and he said, God, I'm ready to die. Like, take me now. I'm not saying I'm ready to die because I've lived a long, good life. I'm ready to die because I give up. The people are too hard on me. God, there's no one else left. The desperation has set in. And we pick up his story again when we see that in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 5, it says that then he lay down under the tree and he fell asleep. And we look at Moses and we see a man who parted the sea, who led a freedom march, who did all these incredible things, whose father-in-law comes in and says, Moses, you're unraveling. You don't see it yet, but Moses, you're falling apart. Moses, what you are doing is not good. And we can learn from their stories. You can maybe learn from my story, although please don't think that I'm trying to lift myself up to the Moses and Elijah status. I just want you to know that I'm there with you on some of these things. But we see that we get to this point because we try and do it all. You know, we say, well, there's just things you just have to do. And so we're just going to do them. Okay, throw one more thing on my plate. And we try and do all of it thinking that we can handle it. When in reality, we can't. We're afraid to admit it, but we can't. We can't put one more thing on our plate. And then not only do we try and do it all, but we try and do it all alone. And I've mentioned this before since moving here, but we all, I feel like we're fairly tough people for the most part. Like, I think that Southern Indiana, one of the things that we can pride ourselves on, and sometimes it turns into an unhealthy pride, but I think we can have it as a healthy pride too, is that we're tough. Like, we're not weak people. We can do a lot of things. But that becomes our downfall when we think that we can do everything and that we don't need help doing it. That we can do everything alone. We look at Moses and he was trying to do it all alone. We look at Elijah and he was trying to do it all alone, to the point that it even says that he left his servant behind when he went on to have this conversation with God, so that he could be all by himself. And I know that many times we celebrate that part of the story, and there are some good things about it, but when you're falling apart and you're trying to do everything on your own, well, that's the part we're looking at this morning. But here's what they did after they got to that point. And here's what I think we can pull from their stories as far as how we can learn from this. So Moses, in chapter 18 and verse 24, it says, Moses listened to his father-in-law. And now any of those of you who are sitting here and you're close to your sons-in-law, you're like, are you paying attention right now? Steve is probably looking at Nick, like, Nick, are you listening right now? Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. Moses listened to wise counsel. And church, sometimes we need to listen to wise counsel, which means we need to seek out wise counsel. I'm not talking about just seeking out your best friend that's going to tell you all the things that you want to hear. I'm not talking about seeking out your friend that's going to be, oh, you poor person, I'm so sorry for you. Like, no, sympathy and empathy, those are great things, but we need to seek out the people who are going to be like, okay, you're right. Now here's what you need to do about it. It's time to take care of this. Or even just to surround ourselves with the people who, even when we don't realize that we're getting to that point, that we are willing to accept them coming to us and saying, look, what you're doing is not good. I know a lot of people, and some of you are sitting in this room, that if somebody who many would consider to be wise counsel came up to you and said, what you're doing is not good, you would unfriend them and kick them out of your life because they dared to tell you that there was something in your life that you needed to work on. Moses was the leader of a nation, and he was willing to listen. It might be a counselor for you. It might be a pastor. It might be a friend. It might be a family member. Are you surrounding yourselves intentionally with someone who can speak into your life? Again, I mentioned that at the 2.5 to 3 year mark of everywhere that we've gone, because of all the expectations that start to come on and just the way that I pile stuff on my own plate, I tend to start burning out and I'm ready to get out of there. So what I have done here is I have intentionally sought out mentors who can look into my life and say, Justin, you can't do what you're doing right now. This isn't going to work out well for you. I wanted to get that done ahead of time so that instead of getting to the 2.5 year mark when I was already ready to give up, that they were already speaking into my life and they were already giving me the wisdom that they have gleaned from their years in ministry. And I can tell you that this is the first place that I've been at the 2.5 year mark where I'm not sitting here going, okay, it's time to start looking for some other churches. And while some of that might be you, I would say a lot of that is that there are people building me up and there are people calling me out in my life that I've never allowed or invited to have happen in the past. Being proactive and getting ahead of it, not being too proud to recognize that we can't handle it all and that we're not perfect all by ourselves. We're not perfect with the other people either, don't get me wrong. But we just can't do it, and so we reach out. Moses listened to wise counsel, and I mentioned that Elijah says that he lay down under the tree and he fell asleep. What Elijah did when burnout was coming on is Elijah took a nap. And sometimes what we need to do is we need to take a nap. We need to rest. We need to allow ourselves to rest. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can do is to actually stop and rest. Oh, but I've got kids and they need me to do all this stuff. Sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can teach your children is that rest is important. And that sometimes we have to use a two-letter word of no, even to our kids, in order to teach our kids how to rest. Otherwise, we're going to raise them to be just like us. Stressed out, burned out. And I don't want to do that to my kids. I don't want them to experience that part. We talk about how we want to give our kids something better than we have, and that's why we always say yes. I want to give my kids something better than I have, and that's why sometimes I have to say no. Because I need to teach them, and I am horrible at this. But I have to force myself to do it for their sake and for my sake. Elijah took a nap. And then the best part about this story, the part that I love, is that an angel comes along, wakes him up, gives him a snack, and Elijah takes another nap. He took a whole day, people. Our bodies are designed to need rest, to recover. I remember working on the harvest crew when our boss's wife, whenever he would be like, hey, we're going to cut on Sunday, she's like, cut on Sunday, break down on Monday. Because the machine needs some rest just like you need some rest. And the sad thing was, she was right. Like, it feels like 75% of the time, we would break down on Monday if we worked on Sunday. But we are designed to rest. We are designed to take naps. Craig Groeschel says it this way. He says, don't let your mind bully your body. Don't let your mind keep telling yourself, I can't afford to rest. To the point that your body does what my body does and finally just says, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. We so often bully ourselves. It's not other people bullying us. I know we say, well, they're always asking me to do stuff. Say no. Say no. Julie's back there right now going, yeah, I tell Doug this all the time. Say no. And whether receiving wise counsel or whether in rest, and for the record, I'm not promoting laziness, I'm promoting rest, and there is a difference. But whether in wise counsel or in rest, listen to God's voice. Because if we're in here to talk about how the Prince of Peace came to give us his peace, that means we have to listen to him in the process of those moments. Your rest may not be the kind where it's I'm going to sit down on the couch for 45 minutes or 3 hours and take a big long nap. For you, rest might mean like you work with your mind all the time and you need to give your mind a break and engage your body. Or maybe you work with your body all the time and you need to give your body a break and you need to engage your mind. And that's restful for you. I do think that there are moments where we need to just stop and we need to be silent. But sometimes rest is things like going for a hike or a walk or a bike ride or a run or whatever it is that you enjoy to do in those things. As long as you're not doing it in order to just push yourself even further, but you're doing it to actually give yourself a break, I think that would be considered rest. Or sometimes it's, hey, I work with my body all the time and I'm going to read a book or I'm going to listen to a podcast now or I'm just going to sit down and have a thrilling conversation with somebody. I mean, that part right there stresses some of you out. Like, that is definitely not rest for me. It's going to look different for different people, but are you doing it to make yourself better and stronger, or are you doing it to actually stop and rest and listen to what God might have to say to you in the midst of all of that? We read this last week. When we see that as a people who are burned out, and this burnout can often lead to things like depression, and it can lead to anxiety and worry, and all these things, we're going to start seeing this. They begin to start working together. They begin to start intertwining with each other to the point that we find ourselves in a really dangerous position. And we're going to continue to talk about some different methods that we can maybe use to fight back in this battle. But we also remember that God is always near. And God has given us what we need. Whether what we need in the moment is another individual, whether a professional or not, to listen. Sometimes what we need in that moment, I believe anyway, and I know that some may disagree, but sometimes what we need is a little bit of medication. God has given us what we need. And he is always near. We look for the aha moments, the big, extraordinary, God got through to me moments, but really so many times when he speaks to us is in the everyday, ordinary moments. Because he's close to us and he's with us in those moments. Psalm chapter 34, I'm going to close with a couple of promises and invitations that God gives to you. As the band, if you want to come on up. Psalm 34:18, we're reminded that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. He saves those who are burned out, who have nothing left, who are broken, who are just ready to be done. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus is speaking to us when he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I am gentle and I am humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Church, I think that we are sitting in a room full of people who need to hear these words and recognize that these words are for you. These words are for me. That Jesus is giving us an invitation saying, "Come to me. I know you're tired. I know you're stressed. I know you're anxious. I know you're burned out. I know that you're in this Christmas season, this Thanksgiving season that's supposed to be full of joy and happiness, and you're just not feeling it right now. You're not there. You aren't feeling or recognizing or accepting, for whatever reason it is, the peace that I came to bring you. But my invitation to you is come to me if you are weary and heavy burdened. Don't try and just add something else to your plate that will take care of all your problems. Don't try and just up your caffeine intake so that you can do just a little bit more. I'm trying to call to you and say, no, come to me, and I will give you rest. I will give you the strength to go and to find the wise counsel. I will give you the wisdom to know what it is that you need to do. I will give you the strength to say that magical 2-letter word of no when you need to say that 2-letter word. And I will give you a spot to find rest. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened. The band is actually just they're gonna play through a song for a little bit. And I asked Courtney, hey, let's not put the words up, at least for a while. We'll eventually put some words up and you can join if you would like to. But I wanted us to intentionally not have the words up there because I know what becomes so easy at that point is to just for the next 5 minutes or so just sing the words on the screen and not actually spend the time with Jesus. To not actually, and I know that that's the intent of the words, is to invite us into a moment of worshiping Jesus and being with Jesus, but we begin to sometimes get to the point where we're just singing somebody else's words, and we're not putting into words what we need to say to Jesus, what we need to accept from Jesus. And so we're going to take just a few moments, and they're just going to play. And I'm going to invite you in that time to just be with him, to tell him what it is that you need to. If you're sitting here today and you're like, I'm right on with what you're talking about. I am burned out. My candle's been burning from both ends for a long time, and it's just not feasible. I don't want to do this anymore. Those symptoms you talked about, yep, I got them. This is an invitation, not from me, from the Prince of Peace, who says, come to me when you are weary and heavy burdened. If during that time or after that time, you would like to just join with somebody else, whether it be somebody nearby you, whether you bring them down to the altar, whether you want to pull one of us aside as staff members, myself, and just say, I need somebody else to pray with me. I need somebody else to be here with me. We're here for that. We're here for each other. When one part of the body suffers, all parts of the body suffer. There's also, in the pew in front of you, there should be some little cards that if you're sitting there and you're like, I don't want to pull somebody like forward. The person that I would like to pray with right now, like I can tell like they're doing their own thing and they need to be talking to Jesus right now, and I don't want to pull them aside. I get that. But you're like, but I need somebody to pray with me. I'd invite you to fill out one of those cards, and your staff here at this church will pray for you this week. And we will reach out to you. And we will connect. And we will be there as much as we possibly humanly can without putting so much on our plates that we just burn out. We will be there. And we will suffer with you, and we will be in joy with you in the moments that you experience those things. It may be because of something like this. It may be that there's a physical ailment, that's the reason that you're starting to feel some of these things that we're talking about. Hey, we want to pray for those things with you too. And so we'd invite you to write those on those cards or find somebody. In other words, there's a lot of things that you can do with this moment. But I urge you, don't let this moment go past without spending some real time with the Prince of Peace. Psalm 23, and this is my final prayer for you before I give you that time. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake, and even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me." That's the gift that our Prince wants to give us.